Are rookie picks overvalued or undervalued in dynasty leagues? That and more this week on Football Guys Dynasty Show. Jordan, rookie picks as well as how you handle rookies in general are probably the most divergent thing in terms of player value and asset value in your dynasty leagues.
Yeah, they can get pretty wild in terms of all that, and we're in a draft class too that this year is going to be really tough. And I mean, I think we're in maybe a historically undervalued class. What do I mean by that? Well, I just went through and I tracked top 10 quarterbacks, top 10 wide receivers, first round running backs, and first round tight ends. Like, what's the average class look like? The average class is 6.4 this century. The median is 7, right? So you should be looking handful, half dozen, right? You should have a decent number. This year, we're on track for 0. I just used grinding the mocks to check this. Malik Willis outside the top 10. Breece Hall in the 40s. He's running back 1. Walker is running back 2 at 56. Garrett Wilson's the closest to actually hitting the threshold of qualifying at 10.3. So we'll see there with him. And then Drake London at 14.2. Trey McBride well outside the first round threshold at 48 overall in terms of expected draft positions at grinding the mocks. We're in a situation that's going to be historically, I think, bad from a production, at least at the top of the board. There's a chance, as you look at this, that there's 5, 6, maybe I've seen 7 wide receivers mocked in the first round. That's going to distort the board a little bit in terms of how it ultimately plays out. You could see as many as 4 or 5 quarterbacks go in the first round. You could see as few as 1. Right. So I do think there's a lot to change there. I think that's going to ultimately impact more the middle rounds than it necessarily will the top. And again, this is going to be a class where really early on in a rookie draft, you're going to be kind of pigeonholed into, do I really want to take a wide receiver at 102, at 103, which is historically not a great investment. This year, you're going to be forced to do that, or you have to figure out a way to get out of that. Is sort of is all that I'm attempting to do really at this point in the class.
Yeah, and what if Kansas City and Green Bay rock the boat? With their sequence of picks there in the late first round. What if they go for a wide receiver or 2 between those 2 teams in that zone? That's going to help things out in terms of the market and who goes that high. But we have some, we kind of talk all the time about running backs can define a class pretty easily. And if we only have 2, maybe 3 guys in the top 75 or 80, that is not going to be the greatest look, because then it's wide receiver or bust, basically, because we don't know. Quarterbacks are an absolute wild card. And I actually broke down rookie picks into different types of the year, in different types of scenarios where your league really defines itself, and it varies league to league on how do they approach it in season, off season, during the draft itself. And then a key one that I think is probably maybe the most undervalued aspect of rookie picks over the last couple of years that I've utilized in the old toolbox is versus veterans, whether that's before the draft, but especially in draft, where you're going to be looking and say, oh, Jameson Williams is hot. Kenneth Walker is hot. Kenny Pickett landed with Team X and he got, number 12 draft position. He's hot, and all of a sudden now you are able to, and you couldn't April 4th or March 4th, but now May 4th, you are able to trade that pick for a player that has such a proven track record. You shouldn't even really chance it with the potential asterisk upside of that rookie coming in, just because of the risk or maybe even the timetable for them to grow into a fantasy starter.
Yeah, right. And that's the interesting part, right? Because again, if you do that, right, if you have to make the wide receiver bet, like make the wide receiver bet at wide receiver 5 or 6.
At 110.
Right. Don't make it. Right. It's such a bad bet. And I put out a tweet earlier. I think it was today, where I just talked about basically, you just look at the simple stuff like, just hitting and base rates and, understanding the base rates of positions, experience, and draft pedigree lead to better decision making. 51% is your first round wide receiver hit rate historically. That's a top 24 season. So it's a coin flip. And we've talked about this, right? As you sort of look at that.
Can I just ask you
Sure.
one thing too? So that hit rate is till infinity, right? That entire player, or at least 3, 4, 5 years into their career, you're at least giving them that long. So that's accounting for, and I would argue this, a wide receiver that I think it was I'm trying to think of who, like if Jerry Jeudy, for example, were to break out this year, and have a top 24 season, look at what you've done through 2 seasons, the waiting of not really being able to use him in your lineup. And he is even maybe a faster progression than some of these guys, where that time value of just having a guy sitting there languishing on your bench at wide receiver 6 for you, and you drafted him at 104 2 years ago, and you're waiting a couple years of not really much. Is he still on your team? Did you package him as part of a deal? Did you get out at some point in time before he actually broke out? And I think that's one of the key factors I've looked at more and more of this. If you break out in year 3, year 4, is that fast enough to really say, with that rookie pick you took them, how many times did they change hands until that occurred?
Right. Is that a change that you've had like recently in terms of how you view that maybe first couple year window versus
for sure, especially on the analyst side? Like I've started running numbers on how do they break out in the first 2 years, because more and more I look at those roster spots in a 2-year window for the first couple of rounds of a rookie draft, and frankly it's probably 6 weeks for 308 or 406, which is why I don't make those picks a whole lot. 410, you just go, let me just trade it for the future 4th, or trade it for some waiver dollars, because I don't want to make the decision right now because it's going to be wrong. You're going to choose 410 wrong compared to, if I can get it off the waiver wire August 17th, I'm going to have a better chance of getting a running back right for some span of time. But that year 3, year 4 breakout. And that's why it slants so hard towards running back, just because if you look at a 1 to 2 year window, it's not even competitive on the breakout rates and getting a top 12 or top 24 season out of these guys. And so that's why wide receiver, man, how many spots you got? We play in FFPC, but even if you play in 25-man rosters, it's still like a tight turtleneck. I mean, you still don't want to be sitting there with 7, 8 wide receivers, and you start taking a Jalen Reagor, wait on him still. You still have him, year 3 coming up, and then now you're drafting over the top of him, and you take Garrett Wilson. And the other thing is, these wide receivers, the early guys, they probably don't have the established quarterback. And then now we're talking about Kansas City and Green Bay and, all these later situations, Buffalo. Like if you land there in the late first round, you could have been wide receiver 4, 5, 6 off the board, yet you got the best quarterback, as opposed to, does Drake London go to Atlanta, in the top 10? Congratulations. Golf clap for you for going in the top 10, or Garrett Wilson. You got wide receiver 1. You're making more money. But for us, for Dynasty, man, now you're attached to what kind of quarterback situation? If Washington took one at 11, like what does that do for us? And yet you got the moniker of wide receiver 1 off the board. But yet, you talked about it before, just kind of turning those round 1 guys on their head and just being like, oh, well, I can draft a guy at 10 and he has the better quarterback, but he's quote unquote blocked, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, the interesting thing is Kansas City and Green Bay not really blocked right now. If Tyreek Hill and Davante Adams were there, you maybe get a better deal. Maybe those guys go 110 to 202. If either of those teams take a wide receiver, I think the floor is like 105, 106, right? I don't care who it is.
Right. It'll be higher than, like, the interesting part will be
absolute floor.
Yeah, and the interesting part is I've seen Christian Watson actually.
If he goes there, like a mid-second guy right now, a mid-second rookie pick, and if he goes there, instant top 103, 4, 5.
Right, just destroying, just totally flipping the board. I haven't even attempted to put down ranks yet in terms of like what a board would look like, because I've got zero idea what the better.
But that's the thing, they're talking of, everyone's talking up, Garrett Wilson and Drake London and Treylon Burks and stuff. But if they're already gone, it's really the next 3 or 4 that are the most interesting in the 20s, because those are where the heavy hitters and where you're going to project Christian Watson to the moon if he gets one of those 2 spots.
Yeah, I took him.
But the other thing is, what if both of those teams pass? What does that say, right? I mean, with some of these, Jahan Dotsons of the world, Jamison Williams, if they pass on those types of guys, I think that's very telling too, because you have 3 picks between those 2 teams, and if they say later,
I mean, and it'll be it'll be very much the dynasty community will be up in arms, right? I mean, like they were when the Jordan Love pick was made, right? When Green Bay has passed on a wide receiver, there's been a collective hair pulling out. Listen, I saw Todd McShay actually mock Brees Hall to Kansas City this week, which was pretty wild. Just think about what would happen to the collective happiness that was the Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Edwards-Helaire, you can get him for 306 now. Rojo is 301.
Right. Which is a far cry from the 106 that he was a couple of years
ago.
Honestly,
Honestly, that landing spot might make it so that Brees Hall doesn't go 101. So I mean, you got a number of variables at play there.
Yeah.
But but isn't that the way it works out? We build up these situations and get, the year Kansas City took Edwards-Helaire. It was, hey, Jonathan Taylor's going to go there, or DeAndre Swift, or all these other guys, and they picked the other one. So wouldn't it be fitting, if you go all the way down the board and you say, well, Chris Olave gets one of those spots, and then Sky Moore gets the other spot, or like it just happens that way. Like whoever your favorite prospect is in the top 4 or 5, just assume they're not going there, because that's the way dynasty works, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a kick down in the nethers. I mean, that's what happens. I mean, you don't get that combination, that perfect storm of situation. I mean, I guess you got Ezekiel Elliott to Dallas. That's what I thought of. Or, if you really liked Alvin Kamara, he ended up going to the Saints, and I remember that being like a perfect storm scenario. But that still wasn't in the first round, so that was still relatively buried. But for me, that would be, I'm a George Pickens fan. If he were to go to one of those 2 spots, I could see that being an absolute. First of all, you got the first round pedigree, so right now he's in the early second, so that would help him. And then the other part would be, well, now you got the quarterback connection, and but some of these guys that are like mid-second as a prospect right now, and then you're going to boost them around or 14, 15 picks after the draft because of landing spot. Wow, that seems rich. That seems like a huge reaction.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the part I think where you start building in some contingencies too, right? You start thinking about, as I start putting together a list of, kind of like, hey, here's how I think I'll kind of approach rookie drafts as the weeks lead up to this draft. You think about it in ranges of outcomes, right? If George Pickens goes in round 2, you think about him one way. If he goes sneaks into the back of round 1, you think about him a different way. If he falls into round 3, you think about him a totally different way, right? A guy that range will sort of apply, and probably not in the first round, but definitely that day 2 to day 3 range is Justin Ross, right? That's another guy for me that I'm really thinking about. Hey, if he sort of falls into the Keenan Allen range of the draft, I could be interested. If he falls into the who Washington drafted a couple years ago that everyone was all excited about from, was it North Carolina State? Kelvin Harmon, right? If he goes into the Kelvin Harmon range of the draft.
Antonio Gandy Golden too was another one.
Totally, right? You think about that range, and you start thinking, okay, like at this price, I'm interested. At this
Equinemius St. Brown is another one that fell through the floor.
Great one. And so you start thinking about these things and say, okay, kind of, hey, here at this point, if this guy goes, like, this is how I kind of feel comfort wise about him at this cost. And then, if he falls or if he goes higher, like, here's how I sort of have to think about adjusting. And if you do that in advance, right? If you've sort of done that in advance, and I always like to write it down so that way I don't do something stupid, because I can look back at my notes and as I was thinking about it in a sober moment and say, hey, listen, like, this isn't like you said that you would kind of do, you would move them here. Now you got all excited because they landed with Green Bay. Do you still think that? Like, what's causing you to change that now?
Well, I think part of it would be the round 1 pedigree too. See, the interesting thing here is you have the situation, but they would also lock in round 1 pedigree versus going at 45 or whatever it is. So, so that's an added factor that actually insulates you of saying, well, yes, the situation, I like the landing spot, but they're also at a linchpin moment. As we know, round 1 versus round 2 is a giant cliff, for wide receiver. And should you be interested in for how much in rookie drafts? And one thing I was thinking about just in terms of the rookie picks, the overvalued, undervalued, it's almost like the key word. I think they're undervalued in this way, that I think not enough people view them as a tool. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people hoard them with the idea of turning over a third of their team. And the NFL teams, you kind of look at NFL teams. I mean, they will specifically. Didn't we just see that with the Eagles? We have 3 first rounders. Let's have 2 this year and then 2 next year. They're always kind of thinking in that way. And I think some dynasty GMs think of it in terms of, well, let me just turn over and have a lot more equity in rookies on my team because I have a lot of picks. I have 2 firsts, 3 seconds, and they make all those picks. And I think instead of utilizing them as weapons of, like, we think of it as like, well, a first, what if that's the second or third piece to get to a huge anchor point at wide receiver or quarterback in super flex, or, does it get me an auto start player? And we're not going to let a first, especially this year where we have the known as opposed to 23 or 24 with unknowns, that we kind of know what we're giving, as opposed to, 107, we kind of know, especially if we get to the draft, what we're giving. And then next year it could be anything, it could be 101 and it could be player X that we don't even know right now. So, but I think not enough people, they're undervalued as a tool to utilize to upgrade your lineup, get a core player, get an anchor guy that, again, maybe they hit on the pick and you still can win the deal pretty easily.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah.
All right. This is Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 98 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. We started
we having a party for 100?
2 years ago. Exactly. We're just going to have one of those dud streamers that come out and explode. But we did start, I think it was right after the NFL draft a couple of years ago. And here we are, 2020, 2021, 2022. We are still kicking and rocking the Football Guys Dynasty podcast here. I do want to remind folks, though, start looking out and start looking on your various platforms. We've had a couple issues over the past few weeks, but know that as this summer progresses, we're going to be on our own platform, our own stream for Football Guys. And yeah, they're Jordan put it up on the screen, but it's join.footballguys.com/dynasty show. And so you're going to start to see it maybe on multiple streams, but transitioning away from the Audible. So we've been on the Audible for a couple of years, and now a lot of the Football Guys shows, just as a heads up, are going to have splintering away and having their own platform and own feed on your podcasting platform. So we've had a little bit of growing pains over the past couple of weeks. It's ironed out now, but just to give you a heads up, we're going to talk about it a little bit in the coming 4 to 6 weeks as we make that transition.
Yeah, I also put it in the show notes too, so you can go. You can get it right there. It's in the link. You can get it in. It'll be June 1 once we're off the Audible feed. So you've got a couple of months now, but go ahead, subscribe over there. And honestly, if we get our subscription numbers up, we'll probably get some shirts for the Dynasty Show podcast. And I've even heard that there's a movement to have Chad's face on it. So we're working on that. So get our numbers up and be there for us. Okay.
They're going to be discounted just like those Baker Mayfield Browns jerseys. If that's the case, be careful what you wish for. But yeah, so June 1, it sounds like it's almost like June 1 cuts. That's the same sort of thing. We're getting June 1 cuts. Yeah. That's kind of what it is. All right. So as always, let's talk some dynasty trades here. We got some interesting ones this week. I want to start out with Davante Adams. And this is the whole concept, of the known versus the unknown. So one quarterback, Davante Adams, for 104 and 111. We talked about the machinations. That might be 104 might be who Green Bay or Kansas City take, the young 21, 22-year-old wide receiver. But you got Davante Adams. You got him going to the Raiders at 29 years old. What do you think about a couple firsts for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the right way to do it, which is you do it now. I hate doing this on credit, right? So pay the price now, sort of get it over with, rip the Band-Aid off in terms of giving the draft capital now if you're going to do that deal. I was tinkering around. I'm writing a series of articles for the website about the fallout from the basically the March mayhem, right, and sort of the fallout from it. And one of the things that I was looking at is if you actually knock 20% off of what Davante Adams's points were last year, right, just lop 20% off the top of what he scored, he's still a top 10 wide receiver, right? So when you start thinking about him, when you start thinking about a reduction in targets because Waller or Hunter Renfrow or these other guys, right, or differences in schemes or yada yada, we don't necessarily know how the Raiders are going to look. You have to realize that he's at such a ceiling. This is like the Travis Kelce issue, right? When Travis Kelce starts to age, you don't really realize it that quick because 20% off the top is still like tight end 2, right? And it takes a massive Mark Andrews season to catch him. that's sort of the level at which Davante Adams is coming from. I don't mind doing this, right? I think this is better along the lines of how to do it. If you can sort of take these and sort of flip them into future assets, maybe at some point between now and when that pick is made, Davante Adams will be cheaper. That would be the other thing that I would think of, or someone like Davante Adams, whether that's Tyreek Hill or whoever it is in season, will be cheaper. Keenan Allen might be cheaper. That would be the other thing I could think of. That's easier said than done. So that's kind of how I would think about this one.
Yeah, you mentioned Travis Kelce, and I keep thinking of Jason Witten with him. That Jason Witten was a top 6 or top 10 guy. Like from this point forward, I think Witten still had 4 more top 12 seasons and 3 more in the top 10, something like that, a couple more in the top 5 or 6. And yeah, I just, a lot of times you discount him. And Davante Adams seems like that same guy that he might turn into like morphing into what we saw. I think he's got a little more juice than this, but DeAndre Hopkins or even someone like Larry Fitzgerald, where you saw in the 30s kind of evolve into a slot guy, a more contested catch guy, but certainly capable of shape shifting in that regard. 2 firsts feels like a lot for a wide receiver at this age, but what I will say, it's not in the top 1, 2, 3. So you're probably not looking at running back 1 off the board. So you're saying probably wide receiver with 1, maybe both of these picks is sort of the BPA. And you start doing the calculus, you said, it's pretty much 50-50, right? I mean, that's what they say about NFL quarterbacks, right? It's a 50-50 shot. And for first round wide receivers, to say that to even get a top 24 season, you're 50-50. And the risk is always on the rookie side because they're not even in the NFL. What if they have an injury or two to start their career? It kind of derails things from a momentum standpoint. I mean, do not think that at 104 or 111, a Jalen Reagor-like scenario 24 months from now is the result of one of these picks. So that's the way it can look like a bloodbath that you gave up Davante Adams. And this whole like rebuilding thing, like it's like, oh, I got to shed Adams because I'm not looking to contend this year. That is the biggest hogwash thing I've ever heard. Like that you got to get him off your roster sort of thing. Like if you hold him and then you start out the year 1-5 and then you trade him for a 23 first and something else, I'd rather do that. I'd rather do that than just bail now and say I'm taking a potential 2 win over a replacement player at a critical position that's hard to get right. And let me just do that now. So, and I would really, honestly, I'd rather trade him for 101. I'd rather take one shot at running back 1 and make the assumption or the projection that Breece Hall is going to go in the top 40, 45, which I think when you look at the draft board and what teams are around the 30s and into like 40, 41, I think it's pretty darn likely that he goes by then. And I think it would be pretty surprising or pretty damning, I would guess, if he does not go by then and the running back position slides all the way, something into the 50s or something. So I would rather take that one consolidated shot on a 21-year-old running back as opposed to, again, looking at 2 wide receivers in the crosshairs with these picks. All right, let's talk 10 team. And we got non-PPR, and we're swapping quarterbacks here, doing a little swapsy. Lamar Jackson for Aaron Rodgers, Courtland Sutton, and 202 and 10 team non-PPR.
And it's non-superflex, right?
Right. It's
really tough to, I mean, we say this, and it's even tougher in 10 team because you're just not, the demand's even less for quarterbacks, right? So it's really hard to trade quarterbacks.
The top, 4 or 5 are probably all that truly matter.
Right. The thing I would say about this is I wonder, as I look at this, right, I think people might have, if we were talking 12-team superflex, I might feel differently about Aaron Rodgers. But I look at this and I think, all right, I need, right, the way that I win this league is someone that can flip the axis of a game on its head. And I wonder, and I worry a little bit about Aaron Rodgers without Davante Adams, right? I wonder what that looks like. I know what that looks like with Lamar Jackson, right? If healthy, all of those things. And listen, for the same reason that we just mentioned, which is there's a large supply of quarterbacks. You can always get one. If for some reason something happens to Lamar Jackson and he fails, you can get
Kirk Cousins for a bag of bolts in this type of format.
100%. So I am very much, and this is very different than what I would think in maybe a super flex, or if the format was different. This is very much a format play. Give me the guy that can change, that can flip the axis of the league, and I think that's Lamar Jackson. And Courtland Sutton doesn't do that. The rookie pick doesn't do that. And start one.
Yeah, if Courtland Sutton finishes at wide receiver 20, even, does that move the needle a ton in this league, in this format?
No.
I would say no.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that it feels like a lot, but like how you're framing it, you're saying who provides the most value at a position where, again, in 10 team, this might make it so you just have one quarterback. There might be guys like Matt Ryan on the waiver wire. I mean, we don't know it's 25 man roster, but if that's 10 teams, that's almost like FFPC for 12 team equivalency. Right. So there could absolutely be starters available for free in this format, like you said, if things go sideways. All right, one of our favorites, Mr. Austin Ekeler, friend of the show, and 16 team, one quarterback, got a little tight end premium here, but you do get those added team elements. You get Austin Ekeler for 104 and a 23 second.
Oh, in this format, it's one quarterback, 16 teams. Smash that.
Okay.
Right, because the pick later is not going to hurt you, right? I think you're ahead of what this is. The other thing I would think about when you're doing this is what sort of the equivalency is of your rookie picks, right? So historically, what they would be versus, what they would be in normal classes, right? You start thinking about that, and I already am at, I think that I can check here. I think it's I think that pick is usually like in the 4th or 5th round of startup drafts. And if that's where, Eckler's smashing that, right? So you just sort of think about that, and that sort of is a good way to, if that's a good way to, I guess, fact check yourself or keep yourself honest, right? I think that those are ways. Yeah, I'm just looking here. It was 104, right? It's the historical equivalency is pick 49 overall. So Ekeler smashes that in the format. So love it.
Yeah, the thing I would think about is Ekeler at 27. And again, stop thinking about being just tied to your league's market value and being truly liquid. I don't think Ekeler at 27 is a guy, or Leonard Fournette or any of these other 27-year-old running backs. In 1 year, they can provide more value than, again, that assumed first round drafted wide receiver at 104. It might take them 4 years to get to add up. And that's probably with 2 seasons as a fantasy starter to get to what a strong running back one can do, like an Ekeler or Fournette with their given situations known and ones that they're going back to with not a whole lot of variables from the year before. So Ekeler in a 2-year window can provide more easily than that entire career over the next 4, 5, 6 years. And if Ekeler expires at 30 years old, which again, who knows? Because he's a receiving-centric guy, a dynamo that actually has some athleticism to lose, a la Danny Woodhead type, that could still be a top 24, top 30 PPR guy, that even when he's waning and not really that 1A option on his depth chart anymore, and that second can drift all the way. You're talking, it could be in the almost 30s, if that goes late in the round. So I wouldn't be viewing that one too heavily. All right, we got one more, Mr. Derrick Henry. So this is an IDP league, 12 team, one quarterback, tight end premium, and you get a couple first rounders here for Derrick Henry, 111, and you get a 23 first, but it is from the team that finished second this past year.
So we know what we say about those picks, which is they're largely random. Again, I wonder with this, the IDP boosts the value a little bit. Probably not, you think about that more in like the second round than you necessarily do about the first round.
Second and third is like the sweet honey pot for IDPs.
Right. The question I'd have about this is, can you make this a 2-way pivot? Like, can you make this trade and then give that first for James Conner? Can you give it for Leonard Fournette? And then you act as essentially a middleman and sort of collect a VIG on it, right? You collect basically a commission on a 3-way deal. That would be the way I would think about this. I wouldn't necessarily be like, hey, I want to sit and bang at 111 at a replacement for Derrick Henry, because it's going to be, I don't think it's either going to be a receiver probably on day 2, or it's going to be a round 3 running back. This is the type of range. We're getting to the potential Devontae Booker late first type of this class in this format. which I don't love at all from for a pedigree standpoint. So the way I would think about this is, can you maybe you pre-shop this, right? And this would be the thing that I would think about. Can you take because 2 firsts sounds nice for Derrick Henry until you get down to the practicality of it, of what they're actually worth.
111 gives you nothing this year, and Derrick Henry's a top 10 guy.
Right. So the thing that I would think about is, hey, go to the person that has James Conner, right? Go to the person that has Leonard Fournette and
or
ask them,
Zeke
hey, what
or
do you
Montgomery
want?
or yeah.
100%. What do you want? What do you want? And they say, hey, I would take a first, right? And then you could say, hey, listen, if I have a late first, right, is it a pre-handshake or what? You have to kind of figure that the actual mechanics of that acceptance out. But think about that, talk to them about the value and say, if I have that to offer, are we good to go? And then pull the deal and treat it like a 2-team, treat it like Miami did last year, right? You know how they did this sort of trade down and then they swap back up. They did that move around thing and they got back to 6. You kind of treat it like that. That's would be how I would think about this deal. Otherwise, I wouldn't be super, super inclined to do it for a 111 this year. Give me a player that'll potentially make a difference, because I don't love that pick.
Yeah, I do think sort of doing it straight up, like Connor in a 23 first or Zeke in a 23 first, I think that's going to be tough to get done. I think that the owner of those types of players, all in that bucket of 26 to 28 years old, they're not going to say any of them are worth pivoting to another for a first. Right. So I do think what you're mentioning is going to have to be a 2-part deal, that you're going to have to trade the ideally 111 and you keep the 23 first in the bag, trade them for another running back that can approximate Derrick Henry this season. I think that would be the strategy du jour. Or again, if you just wanted to pivot to a wide receiver or something like that, but 111, you'd probably have a better chance of going wide receiver and 23 first for Derrick Henry than staying within the position.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it would almost have to take that 2-parter. Like, I was actually able to execute a Najee Harris for Ekeler in a first this week, or I don't know, sometime within the last week. The COVID quarantine has not done well for either my beard or my timing of this.
Is that one that you threw in 206? Can you rehash that deal? Because I remember you texting about it.
I gave Harris and 206, and I got back Ekeler in a 2023 first. Right. And my math on it was pretty simple. I'm a dead red contender. I'm going to pocket the first, and I'm going to.
Najee Harris is older than people think.
And he's older than people think, and I'm actually going to increase my win equity this year, because Ekeler is a higher projection, I think, than Najee Harris is, right? In early projections, and I think that'll hold. So
Ekeler gives you multiple years. You have a chance to win that deal, like by a pretty big margin.
Correct.
If he gives you one excellent year and then one just pretty good season, could turn out pretty fair.
Right. And now I've taking the 300 or 400 level of thinking about that deal. I have 2 firsts next year. I've got a couple of firsts this year. Right. I'm already thinking about, all right, how do I make, is there a 2-piece deal that I can make at tight end? Is there a 2-piece deal that?
But also, how do you make sure, right? Like, what I love though is you stay in that competing mindset. So probably now you're thinking like, oh no, that pick will not be early. Like, watch this. You're right. Like, watch me make sure I get cornerstone guys. If I have any weakness, like you said, like, can I get one of those auto start tight ends? And now, I mean, I'm cooking with gas, and yeah, that's probably going to be 109 plus.
Right. Yeah. So it's very much and it's stockpiling assets. And again, I think I have become much more open to that type of deal, because I'm not necessarily worried about what's going to happen 3 or 4 years from now. Right. Let's worry about.
Oh no, Ekeler's 31 and Najee's 27 at that point in time.
Right. He's bad, and honestly, like, if there's a chance that there could be a win difference between the two of them this year. That's a big difference. And again, I like Najee Harris.
Wow, I was gonna say you are really down on Najee Harris, because you're like, the way you're talking is either A, Austin Ekeler could be running back 1, or B, Najee Harris could be running back 14.
I mean, I think
maybe I'm going extreme,
higher. But I think Ekeler's median's higher, and I think his ceiling's higher, especially in a Pittsburgh offense that's going through a little bit of a rebuild. You could kick back at me and say, hey, listen, Roethlisberger sucked at the end of his career, and it didn't really hurt Najee
But
Harris.
it's not like they got Matt Ryan. It's not like they like they didn't go down that rabbit hole, and now it's Mitch Trubisky, and a rookie doesn't really change the calculus.
Right. And if it is Malik Willis, is Malik Willis going to just, I mean, Roethlisberger, it would be like 4th and 9. And Roethlisberger was like, I'm going to check it to Najee Harris 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage and play like this pseudo mind game stuff.
It reminded me of, there were some moments that reminded me of Le'Veon Bell and the Jets.
Yeah.
If for folks that remember, if you're old enough to remember Le'Veon Bell and the Jets, my God, there would be 33 touches, 86 yards, and 17 PPR points that you go, wow. It's like that game that DeAndre Swift had. Was it against the Bears? Where he was like, no mas, 38 touches.
Right.
And it was just in a cloud of dust.
Right.
It was Dan Campbell, right? It was Dan Campbell at his peak. Just going like, you know who I got? Workhorse DeAndre Swift.
Yeah.
It's not getting in space.
When you look at the deal, over the past month, Najee Harris 203 in startup drafts, Ekeler 403. So that's basically trading that for trading 203 for 403 and a first. I actually tried that at a different position and had someone swear at me, which was notable. Like the exact same draft positions. It was pretty funny. So when you can sort of execute that, I mean, I would do that in a startup draft, right? And I would probably do that here. If assuming it's not a quarterback, which is what is exactly what I did. So I would do that deal, and that's why I did it. And I think if you sort of look at deals like that, again, where you can, especially the key part of the calculus is I can beat Najee Harris this year, right? And I think I'll be interested to see how we project that. But you look at some other people that I trust, like Mike Clay has an initial set of projections out really early that has Ekeler, beating Najee Harris, which is kind of confirms what my process was early on in the offseason. I think where you can do that and actually beat the projection, that's where you can actually kick that trade really well.
Heading into the NFL draft, especially all those priority free agent signings at the end for some of your deeper dynasty leagues, and you want to be up on the news, and that's delivered by Joe Bryant here at Football Guys for the daily email update. So you want to go to the top right homepage for Football Guys, sign up, free email update. Over 500,000 fantasy and dynasty GMs out there are part of that daily email update. You get things like Jordan's articles that come out that get featured there. So right to your inbox, you don't even have to go anywhere on the Football Guys site. You get content right there between news, analysis, articles, a heads up for what Football Guys has in store for you that day, that week coming up. All right, quotes from the Football Guys Dynasty Forum this week. And I am becoming my parents with single family home ownership. That's been just a mental mind shift for me over the past couple of weeks. But, I still haven't said phrases like this, which is, what kind of fish those are? Come on, don't be coy. All right. So going back to football, we got Javonte Williams is usually ranked as the running back 2. There's no room for his value to increase. His ranking also assumes that he's a workhorse. This is yet to be seen. I'm convinced that Denver either brings back Melvin Gordon or drafts a running back.
It's hard to argue with that logic. I mean, that sounds like something that you said, Chad. I mean,
Gordon is still out there. Gordon is still out there.
Right. And it appears, again, we don't know, but it doesn't appear that it's a lack of interest. It just is like, I'm going to keep my options open, right? Denver has said we're open to having him back, right? And that can't feel good for Javonte Williams at 202 in a start.
This is a slow playing AJ Dillon type scenario. It's just like playing out here.
Right.
You're waiting.
Right. How do you take Javonte Williams ahead of Christian McCaffrey, for example, or ahead of Najee Harris, who I spent 5 minutes ragging on, but again, it's not Najee hate. It's more Ekeler love and playing some odds there, right?
I will say there's a bit of a disconnect though, because this whole ADP of running back 2 or 3 for Javonte Williams, I have a few spots on him, and I have not been able to leverage that extreme value that may exist. And I still don't know, where that is, because I haven't seen a lot of startup boards that are sitting there with Javonte Williams actually at number 2, someone actually diving in and taking him there. So I think there's a disconnect, just as like DeAndre Swift is another one that I've seen a disconnect between ADP or draft results versus an existing league trade market for saying, let me basically have him as a baby Jonathan Taylor in terms of how much he costs in the market.
Yeah.
But yeah, Melvin Gordon sitting out there, and I'll tell you, the guy that I'm watching the most for, like, I wish I had a camera on him between 25 and 40 in the NFL draft. It's Michael Carter for the Jets. He's sitting there, and they have 35 and 38, which could be right in the crosshairs of running back 1. And can he get through that gauntlet? And he's still not done. They have 69, so it's not like he's out of the woods, but he's going to be the one of, can Breece Hall please go before that? Can he please go before that? It's Trey Mason. It just kind of sitting there, Could he be in the green room? Couldn't there be a Michael Carter green room this draft season? Because he's another one, just like, again, Melvin Gordon sitting out there for Javonte Williams. It feels like there's a lot of moving pieces at running back still to be made between rookies and notable free agents that could still move the needle from workhorse role to just kind of 1A feature back for some of these guys. What's the going rate for moving up 1 or 2 spots in a rookie draft? I'm eyeballing one player and think I need to move from 110 to 7, 8, or 9.
I would do it with we call this packaging up. I would try and do it with a with a non-core piece, right? With someone that you think is a sell. And whether that's maybe a situational wide receiver, someone like that. The only thing that I would say about that, I wouldn't tend to do that in future picks, later rookie picks. I call it the zone of death. Somewhere in the second round, and when all the pedigree dries up, something after that you could move up,
just to give a 23-second to move from like 110 to 108.
It's a good way to start losing your dynasty.
You're going blind though. See, the part I got on this question is there's one player you want and you think 7, 8, 9 is absolutely where they're going to go and where you need to be.
Right.
Really?
Right.
This is almost like that guess the player. Like, what player do you think that is? Because if it's a wide receiver, we've talked already about playing arbitrage, and it could easily be wide receiver 6 that ends up wide receiver 3 in the class if they just land in a spot or 2. So there's so much variable in that range of the rookie draft. You might get a look at running back 3 at 110 that actually got, day 2 pedigree or something like that. So I just think there's too many variables, and the whole getting locked in on one guy in that range of the draft, I mean, to me, that is not the right pre-draft approach of positioning yourself, because really the only part you're safe is 101. You're safe at 101. I would say you kind of know the 1, 2, 3 players you'd like to get at 2 or 3, but outside of that, I just think there's a lot of moving pieces here. So the whole like moving up now, I honestly, in this type of scenario, I would wait. And it's okay. Like, if you are going to get squeezed out, you see ADP on May 1st, May 2nd, and you're like, his ADP is 6.6. I'm at 10. I'm not going to get him. I would rather you be more aggressive if that is your guy, and you are going to consolidate and give 110 and 210 and some other player and move up and get him and pay more. But you had to do it. I think there's a decent chance whoever you're thinking you need to be at 7, 110 might be fine. So I would have pause in this specific scenario because of how they're referencing why they're moving up.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that's probably going to be a receiver, is sort of the hunch that I get from the sound of that.
So don't be so sticky. Yeah.
And I'm not. My days,
right? You wouldn't be talking about Isaiah Spiller. That's not the ilk of this. Or like Kenneth Walker is usually before that, so that's probably not the reference. If it's one quarterback, you're probably not referencing quarterback or tight end, or just it reeks of wide receiver. And again, a guy that goes mid first might not go to the greatest quote unquote situation, and they could fall easily behind those later first guys. So be open to that possibility.
Yeah,
wide receiver 1 off the board, right? If they go to Atlanta at 8 or 9, and that's not going to be well received. Even though you're technically wide receiver 1 off the board, you might be wide receiver 3 for Dynasty.
Right. Yeah, my days of trading up in first round of rookie drafts for wide receivers is over. Right.
Where's those receipts? Let me do some quick screenshot searching for Jordan back 2020.
I've died on that hill. We are not going back.
I have learned that lesson 3 times over.
Yes.
All right, last one. It's a little bit long, but this is a really good thing for Dynasty this time of year when we're thinking about new leagues. Frankly, you should be 3 months removed from deciding if you're going to pare down your leagues as well. I'm in 2 leagues, and it's much more relaxing. But I'm a live and die with every play kind of FF guy. I watch the games. I get super excited when my players make a big play. I have a friend who plays in 20 plus leagues, and they really don't check any scores until the weekend is over. It's a much more clinical approach. I'm sure we can relate to the clinical and sort of the portfolio method. But do you remember when you were just in 1, 2, 3 leagues, whether that was redraft only or a dynasty league or two mixed in?
Again, the friend that he was describing sounds exactly like Chad Parsons, so that's notable. Yeah, I do, and it's like, and I think back to like championship week, right, or the playoffs when you really start tuning in. With us, I do this for a living, right? You do this for a living. I'm writing articles, right? It's an 18-week sprint of a job. Sunday, I'll go get on my bike or, do some lawn work or get outside. There's nothing.
1 to 4 is actually the window where I'm unlikely to be on any device.
Right. You
Any
can't
electronical anything, right?
Right. You can't find Chad between the hours of 1 and 4 on Sunday. And honestly, like then you come back and you sort of look at it, or, I might even have like Red Zone on, like just streaming the audio of Red Zone just to sort of keep up with what's going on. But having more leagues, and I joke about this, but I really do think that the difference between having like 3 or 4 leagues and having 20 isn't that big, right? Because you're already, if you're this
It's not
person,
5x, yeah,
right? If you're this person, you're already spending the requisite amount of time preparing. You're reading, right? You're subscribing. You're listening to us 46 minutes into this podcast. Right, that stuff doesn't triple, quadruple, or go 5, 6, 7 times more just because you're playing in more leagues. It tends to just be more trade offers. It tends to be a little bit more management, but you already know your stuff, right? So expanding your leagues isn't. I mean, it is more work. It is not.
I think he's talking about what shifts mentally, and the
right.
how do you actually. I mean, it is very formulaic when you start
Right.
setting your waiver wire. I mean, those things become very much, just checking boxes. You're looking for the same guys and the same depths over and over and over again. I would say it would differ if you are like one of them's a heavy IDP league of like one of your 20 leagues, and then one other one is like campus to Canton, some big college/Devy landscape sort of thing. Those do add a decent amount of time, but going to 2 quarterback or 2 tight end or something like that doesn't add a whole lot. You're still talking about the same subset of skill position players and the same player pool of the NFL. So, I would say I remember being a big quote unquote NFL fan or a fan of 2 or 3 teams or whatever. And just the whole living and dying, like it wasn't for me. Like because there's only one winner at the end of the year. I mean, think back to if you're a North Carolina fan, right? They get all the way to the finals and you can say it was a great ride, but they lost. They lost in the championship game. So ultimately, you get all the way to the closing minutes of potentially winning a championship and then you don't win. So if you have like, in my opinion, and maybe you can speak to this, Jordan, about, just being a Buffalo Bills fan, that if you go quote unquote almost all the way, I mean,
I know how this feels.
No, I know. So is that does winning a Super Bowl or going all the way, if you had one dynasty team and you win it, does that good feeling with an NFL team or a dynasty team, does that just go over the top of all the years that don't end that way? Is what I would ask.
I wouldn't know on a professional team. I wouldn't know if that's true or not.
Sabres maybe.
Syracuse in 03.
Buffalo University.
The Syracuse. By the way, shout out to Carmelo Anthony with an awesome tweet with a picture of him holding the national championship, congratulating Kansas because that's who they beat in 03. So shout out to Melo on that beauty. Yeah, I mean, it becomes about what matters, right? And again, if you're playing one home league, right, there's a lot more mental pressure on that. If you play some more leagues, again, different formats, I tend to gravitate towards very similar formats because they're like a game to me, and I'm getting better at that game, so I understand it more, and it's a profit-making endeavor as well, right? All of those things. It becomes why are you playing it, right? And so I think playing more allows you to be better, not because you're because again, not because you're consuming more information or anything like that, just because you're very, you're able to make a much more, I don't know if detached is the right word, but you're able to make better decisions because you're not just pulling on one league and you're not just worried about your one share of Patrick Mahomes and did I get enough or all that stuff. Like, hey, I've got 3 or 4 of them. Like, I can make some trades here. Maybe I can acquire them in someplace else, right? You make all of those trades easier. Plus, you understand value. You're getting more mental reps and all that stuff. It just becomes a little bit easier. I think you become a better player and it becomes a little bit less mentally taxing. Would be the thing.
Yeah, and I think that portfolio method, Derrick in the chat mentions, when one team doesn't do well, you pretty much just move on and say, how'd the next one do? And that's kind of my process on Tuesday. When I go through with the waivers, I'm checking out and filling out my Excel sheet on wins, losses, all play record, that type of stuff. But it's more of an observational thing than like getting depressed about one and super excited about another, because it's the aggregate of, how many wins above expectation or how am I doing, in general. And it's not so much this is my one favorite league and this is the one that I want to win more than any other type approach there. But I do think it's a very interesting mental exercise. I've always wondered about you have NFL rooting interests, and then how much does that, or does it almost have a negative effect for how you view those players or those teams in the dynasty lens of you almost avoid those players, or maybe you gravitate more towards them because of a rooting interest there. And some people like to keep those things separate. Some people actually have this opposite kind of thing of like, well, if I fade them in dynasty and they do well in the NFL, like it's like it can all work out, or vice versa. So I think the mental aspect of having a portfolio or playing in just 1 or 2 or 3 leagues is really an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the thing about how does being a fan of a team and a fantasy manager, how do those things intersect? It totally does for me. I watch the Bills. I do watch the Bills and I follow the Bills, and I tend to watch not necessarily all of every game, but a good chunk of every game. Second.
Do you think you're better? Do you think if so you had to live and die by your analysis on is the market right on certain players? Do you think the Bills would be in the top 1, 2, 3 teams in the NFL if you had to pare it down and pin it?
I can't get. Well, the problem is I'm biased, right? In a way that's actually counterintuitive. I have really struggled to put. Would I think if you blind resumed it that you would take Josh Allen over Patrick Mahomes in a blind resume competition for quarterback 1? Especially, I think a lot of people have done that now since Tyreek Hill's been traded. But I think even before then, if you just blind resumed them, I think that Josh Allen had probably the better resume, especially 2 top, 2 quarterback 1 overall finishes in the past 2 years. I mean, that person probably warrants to be at quarterback 1. There's like 0 chance that I'm going to put him there, right? Just because like I've seen all the bad stuff, and that's not to say that the bad outweighs the good or anything like that. But in my mind, I can't separate like, oh, I've seen this bad stuff, whether it's a fear that it's going to happen again or it's my team and I don't want to be let down in fantasy, right? I mean, there's all these things. I was just like, there's no way I'm putting Josh Allen over Patrick Mahomes, but I do think he warrants that conversation. I am sort of biased against it in a way that is a little bit counterintuitive.
Yep. All right. Well, in this episode, we got to dive into some NFL fandom. Want to thank everybody that contributes over there at the Footballguys Dynasty Forum or completed Dynasty Trades threads, as that really does fill the holster here for the end of the show in this segment with some quotes. It ends up talking about players that we don't schedule with the Dynasty trades in the earlier part. Some good discussion on trading rookie picks, talking about profiles. And I love the direction we go. A lot of times, Jordan mentioning his trade about Najee Harris, Austin Ekeler, Davante Adams, Derrick Henry. We talk about ways that you can change these trades to make them better, to optimize them, make them two-way goes. We talk about those avenues all the time. And then finally at the top of the show, talking about rookie picks. And that, of course, always bleeds into our dynasty trades in the middle of the show, talking about the time of year, but also talking about, and we're starting to get Jordan talking about the 2022 draft class just a little bit. We're about 3 weeks removed from the draft. So we're going to be talking about arbitrage opportunities coming up on our 2-year anniversary for the Dynasty show here. And just to remind folks again about the separating feeds, June 1 and getting off of the Audible feed, getting onto our own platform. And just a reminder that if you do get on there, giving us a rating, a review on the podcasting platforms will definitely help with all of those podcasting ratings and getting us in with some good guideposts to kick off our journey, our solo journey now, getting out from under the big wing and frankly the nice warm wing of the Audible and all the work they've done for thousands of shows now with Cecil Lammey and Sigmund Bloom. So that's going to do it for us this week. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty leagues.